Maya Richardson met the man who would change her life. Bitar in a hotel bar in Paris on a Tuesday night in September. She was there for a design conference, one of those international gatherings where interior designers from around the world converged to discuss trends and network and pretend they weren't just looking for new clients. She'd spent the entire day in presentations about sustainable materials and minimalist aesthetics, her feet aching from walking the exhibition halls in heels she should have known better than to wear. By 8 p.m., she was exhausted and overwhelmed, and sitting alone at the hotel bar, drinking wine that cost twice what she'd normally pay, and trying to work up the courage to explore Paris at night the way she'd promised herself she would. He sat down next to her without asking, which should have annoyed her, but somehow didn't. Korean, she noticed immediately, maybe early 30s, wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than her monthly rent back in New York. He had the kind of face that was striking rather than classically handsome, sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to actually see her rather than just looking at her the way most men did. "American?" he asked, his English perfect with just a trace of an accent that made every word sound more interesting. "Is it that obvious?" Maya replied, gesturing at herself with her wine glass. "Do I have a sign on my forehead?" "The way you're looking at the wine menu like it personally offended you," he said, his smile widening. "Americans always look betrayed by European wine prices, like you can't believe we have the audacity to charge this much for something that comes from grapes." Maya laughed despite herself. €30 for a glass of wine is offensive. I could buy an entire bottle for that at home. "But you're not at home," he pointed out. "You're in Paris. Everything costs more in Paris. It's part of the experience, the beautiful robbery of tourists who don't know better." "Are you calling me a tourist?" Maya asked, pretending to be offended. "I'm here for business." "So am I," he said. "But we're still tourists. Neither of us lives here. We're just passing through, pretending we belong in this city that barely tolerates outsiders." They talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily in a way that Maya hadn't experienced in years. He told her he was in Paris for meetings, something vague about hotels and business expansion that he didn't elaborate on. She told him about the design conference, about her small firm in New York that was finally starting to get high-end clients, about the challenge of making a name for yourself in a field dominated by people with family money and connections. He listened in a way that felt genuine, asking questions that suggested he actually cared about the answers rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. They discussed Paris, the parts they'd seen and the parts they wanted to see. He'd been before, multiple times, knew the city well enough to recommend restaurants that weren't tourist traps and museums that were worth the crowds. She'd never been, had always dreamed of it, but never had the time or money or courage to actually book a trip until this conference gave her an excuse. They talked about travel more broadly, about the places they'd been and the places they wanted to go. He'd traveled extensively, she gathered, Europe and Asia and parts of South America. She mostly stayed in the States, working too much to take real vacations, living the kind of life where a long weekend felt extravagant. They talked about life and work and the weird liminal space of hotel bars where you could be anyone, where your normal life didn't exist, where you could tell truths to strangers that you'd never tell to people who actually knew you. He didn't tell her his name, and she didn't ask, which felt romantic and mysterious, like something out of a movie. She didn't tell him hers either, playing along with the fantasy of anonymity, of being two people who existed only in this moment without past or future. Around midnight, after they'd been talking for nearly 4 hours and had gone through 2 bottles of wine between them, he leaned closer and said quietly, "I have a room upstairs. Would you like to see it?" Maya should have said no. She wasn't the type of person who slept with strangers in foreign countries. She was careful and practical and risk-averse, the kind of woman who planned everything and rarely did anything spontaneous. But there was something about him, about this night, about being in Paris and feeling like maybe she could be someone different for a few hours, someone brave and reckless and free. "Yes," she said. His room was on the 8th floor, a suite that must have cost a fortune, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. They barely made it through the door before they were kissing, urgent and desperate, like they'd been waiting for this all night. The sex was intense and passionate and completely unexpected. The kind of connection that Maya had only read about in novels and assumed was fictional. Afterward, they lay in the dark talking, his arm around her, her head on his chest, and it felt more intimate than the sex had been. He told her about growing up with expectations he didn't want to meet, about disappointing people he loved, about trying to figure out who he was separate from who everyone wanted him to be. She told him about losing her mother when she was young, about being raised by her grandmother who did her best but didn't really understand Maya's ambitions, about building a career from nothing and still feeling like she was one mistake away from losing everything. "What are you running from?" he asked her in the darkness. "What makes you think I'm running from something?" Maya replied. "Because you're in Paris at a conference and you're spending the night with a stranger instead of networking or exploring the city. You're avoiding something." He wasn't wrong. Maya was avoiding the reality of her life in New York, the pressure of her growing business, the expectations of her clients, the loneliness of being 31 and single, and starting to wonder if she'd prioritized the wrong things. "What are you running from?" she asked instead of answering. "Everything," he said simply. "Family, responsibility, the life people expect me to live. I've been traveling for 2 years, avoiding going home, pretending I can just exist in this space between who I was and who I'm supposed to become." "Does it work?" Maya asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Nights like this, it works perfectly." In the morning, Maya woke up alone. He was gone. No note, no number, just a memory of the best night of her life with a stranger whose name she'd never learned. She should have been upset, but instead she felt grateful, like they'd shared something perfect and ended it before reality could ruin it. She went back to New York and tried to forget about him, but found herself thinking about that night more often than she wanted to admit. About the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd listened like her words actually mattered, the way he'd touched her like she was precious. About conversations in the dark about running from the lives we're supposed to live. That was 3 years ago. Maya had thought about him occasionally over the years, wondering who he was, where he'd gone, whether he ever thought about her, whether that night had meant anything to him, or if she was just another woman in another city during his 2 years of avoiding responsibility. But life moved on the way it always does. She built her interior design business, taking on bigger clients, making a real name for herself in New York's competitive design world. She dated occasionally, but nothing stuck. Nobody quite measuring up to a memory of one perfect night with a stranger. When she met James Park at a charity gala 6 months ago, she thought, maybe she'd finally found something real, something that could actually work. James was 52, a Korean hotel mogul who owned a chain of luxury properties across Asia and was expanding into the U.S. market. He was there as a major donor. She was there because one of her clients had bought a table and invited her to fill a seat. They were seated next to each other at dinner and talked for hours. The conversation easy, even though their lives were completely different. He was sophisticated and charming and generous in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. He told her about building his hotel empire from a single property his father had owned, about expanding across Asia, about his plans for the American market. She told him about her design business, about the struggle of breaking into high-end residential design, about the satisfaction of creating beautiful spaces that people actually lived in. He asked her to consult on his New York hotel project the following week. She said yes. The consultation turned into dinner. Dinner turned into regular dates. Dating turned into a relationship that felt comfortable and stable and good, even if it wasn't particularly passionate. James courted her properly, old-fashioned and respectful in a way that Maya appreciated after years of dating men who couldn't commit to plans more than 2 days in advance. He took things slow, didn't push for sex until she was ready, treated her like someone who mattered rather than just someone he was seeing. He sent flowers to her office. He remembered details from conversations. He introduced her to his business associates, made it clear she was important to him. After 4 months of dating, he took her to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the city and proposed over dessert. The ring was beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, clearly expensive but not ostentatious. "I know this might seem fast," James said as he opened the ring box, "but I'm 52 years old. I know what I want and I know what matters. You're smart and talented and kind. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You're building something real with your business, and I respect that. I think we could have a very good life together, Maya. Will you marry me?" Maya should have asked if he loved her. Should have wondered why he'd listed her qualities like credentials rather than talking about feelings. But she was 31 and tired of dating men who wasted her time. James was stable and successful and treated her well. This was a good offer, a good life. Maybe not a fairy tale, but fairy tales weren't real anyway. "Yes," she said. They set the wedding for Christmas Eve, just 6 months away. James wanted something small and elegant at his estate in Connecticut, family and close friends only. Maya agreed because she didn't have much family anyway, just her grandmother who was 90 and might not be able to travel, and a handful of friends who'd probably be relieved they didn't have to buy expensive gifts and sit through a long ceremony. The next 6 months passed quickly, filled with wedding planning and work and getting to know James better. He was kind and attentive, generous with both his time and money. He supported her business, connected her with potential clients, offered advice when she asked for it. He was a good partner on paper, checking all the boxes that mattered. But there was something missing that Maya couldn't quite name, some spark or passion or depth of feeling that she kept waiting for and that never quite materialized. She told herself it would come with time. That mature love was different from the passionate intensity of her 20s. That stability and respect mattered more than butterflies and weak knees. That she was lucky to have found someone like James who actually wanted to marry her. Maya arrived at James's Connecticut estate a week before the wedding to finalize details and settle in before the ceremony. The house was exactly what she'd expected, a massive modern structure on 20 acres. All clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, decorated with expensive art and furniture that looked beautiful but uncomfortable. James gave her a tour, showing her the rooms where guests would stay, the outdoor space where the ceremony would take place, the ballroom where they'd have dinner after. "It's beautiful," Maya said, because it was even if it felt cold and impersonal. "I'm glad you like it," James said. "I want you to be happy here. After the wedding, we can redecorate anything you want. Make it feel like your home, too." That afternoon, Maya was in the living room reviewing flower arrangements with the wedding planner, a efficient woman named Caroline who had opinions about everything, when she heard voices in the hallway. James was talking to someone in Korean, his tone warm and affectionate in a way she rarely heard from him. "Maya," James called out, walking into the living room with a man following behind him. "I want you to meet my son. He flew in from Seoul this morning for the wedding." Maya looked up from the flower samples, and her entire world stopped. The man standing next to James was him, the stranger from Paris, the man she'd spent one perfect night with 3 years ago, the man whose face she'd memorized, whose voice she still heard sometimes in her dreams, whose touch she'd never quite forgotten. He was here, in her fiancé's house, being introduced as her fiancé's son. It was impossible. This couldn't be happening. "Maya, this is Daniel," James said proudly, his hand on the younger man's shoulder. "He runs our sole properties. Daniel, this is Maya, my fiancée." Daniel looked at Maya, and she saw recognition flash across his face, saw his expression shift from polite greeting to complete shock in the space of a second. He knew. He remembered. Paris. The hotel bar. That night 3 years ago, when they'd been anonymous strangers sharing something that felt inevitable. "Nice to meet you," Daniel said, his voice carefully neutral, his face schooling itself into polite blankness, even though his eyes were screaming. "You too," Maya managed, standing on shaking legs, reaching out to shake his hand, because that's what you did when meeting your fiancé's son for the first time. Their hands touched, and Maya felt electricity, the same pull she'd felt 3 years ago, the same magnetic attraction that had made her say yes to going to his room that night. "Daniel lives in Seoul full-time," James was saying, oblivious to the tension crackling between Maya and his son. "He's done an excellent job expanding our Asian market. I'm very proud of him. He doesn't visit the States often, so I'm particularly glad he could make it for the wedding." "Wouldn't miss it," Daniel said, still looking at Maya, his expression unreadable. The wedding planner cleared her throat. "Should we continue with the flowers, or would you prefer to catch up with your son?" "Continue," James said. "Daniel, why don't you get settled in your room? We'll have dinner together tonight." Daniel left, and Maya somehow made it through the rest of the meeting, nodding at whatever Caroline suggested about roses and peonies and whatever else she was saying. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. The man from Paris was James's son. The best night of her life had been with her fiancé's son. She'd slept with Daniel. She was marrying his father. This was a nightmare. That night at dinner was torture. Maya sat across from Daniel next to James, trying to act normal while feeling like she was going to be sick. James talked about the wedding plans, about his business expansion, about how glad he was to have Daniel home, even briefly. "Tell Maya about Seoul," James said, "about the new hotel you opened in Gangnam." Daniel talked about the property, about the challenges of the Korean market, about his work. His voice was calm and professional, but Maya could see the tension. In his shoulders, could feel the weight of everything unsaid between them. After dinner, James excused himself to take a business call. Maya and Daniel were left alone in the dining room, the silence heavy between them. "We should talk," Daniel finally said quietly. "There's nothing to talk about," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't know. It was 3 years ago. It was before I met your father. It doesn't matter." "It matters," Daniel said. "You're marrying my father." "I know exactly who I'm marrying," Maya said. "And that night in Paris was before any of this. It was completely separate. We don't have to tell him. We can just forget it happened." "Can you forget?" Daniel asked, leaning forward. "Because I've spent 3 years trying to forget that night, and I couldn't. I compared every woman I met to you, and none of them came close. And now you're here, wearing his ring, planning to marry him, and I'm supposed to just forget that I know exactly what you look like when you—" "Stop," Maya interrupted. Don't do this." "Don't do what?" Daniel asked. "Don't tell the truth? Don't acknowledge that we have history? Don't mention that there was something between us that felt it was one night?" Maya cut him off. "One night 3 years ago with a stranger. It doesn't mean anything now." "Doesn't it?" Daniel challenged. Before Maya could respond, James came back into the room. "Sorry about that," he said, sitting back down at the head of the table. "Business never stops," Daniel, I was telling Maya earlier that you had some difficulties in your 20s, but you've really turned things around. She should know the full story. Dad, Daniel said. And Maya noticed he called James Dad, even though James had introduced him as his son without any qualifiers. I don't think... No, it's fine, James said. It's part of your history and Maya should know. Daniel spent his early 20s being somewhat reckless. Partying across Europe, avoiding responsibility, spending money without thinking about consequences. I was worried about him for a while, thought he'd never settle down. The Paris period was particularly difficult. Maya felt her stomach drop. Paris? She managed to ask. Yes, Daniel was living in Paris about 3 years ago, James said. Supposedly handling some business for our European expansion, but mostly just enjoying himself from what I could tell. It took him some time to grow up, but he eventually did. Now he's one of my best executives. Everyone makes mistakes when they're young, Maya said carefully, not looking at Daniel. The important thing is that he's grown past them. After dinner, Maya excused herself and went to her room, claiming exhaustion from the long day of planning. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do. She should tell James the truth. She should call off the wedding. But what would she say? That she'd had a one-night stand with his son 3 years before. She met him. That they'd spent hours talking in a hotel bar and then had sex that she still thought about. That seeing Daniel again had made her question everything. She couldn't say any of that. It would hurt James. It would ruin everything. She just had to get through the week, get through the wedding, and eventually these feelings would fade. It was just the shock of seeing Daniel again. It didn't mean anything. The next morning, Maya woke up early and went to the kitchen for coffee. Daniel was already there, sitting at the counter with his laptop open. Couldn't sleep either, he asked. Too much on my mind, Maya said carefully, pouring herself coffee. Daniel, we need to establish some boundaries. What happened in Paris stays in Paris. We're never going to talk about it. We're never going to be alone together. We're going to be polite and distant, and that's it. Is that what you really want? Daniel asked. Yes, Maya said firmly. I'm marrying your father in 6 days. That's what's happening, and you need to accept it. Do you love him? Daniel asked. The question hung in the air between them. Maya wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to be certain, but the word stuck in her throat. I care about him very much, she finally said. He's a good man. We have a good partnership. That's not what I asked, Daniel pressed. Do you love him the way you should love someone you're marrying? Do you feel for him what you felt that night with me? That's not fair, Maya said. That night was fantasy. It wasn't real life. Your father and I have something real and stable and good. But do you love him? Daniel asked again. Why are you doing this? Maya demanded. Why are you making this harder than it needs to be? Because you're about to make a terrible mistake, Daniel said. Because you're marrying my father for the wrong reasons. Because I know what it felt like to be with you, and I know you felt it too. That doesn't just disappear, Maya. Before Maya could respond, James walked into the kitchen. There you both are, he said cheerfully. I was hoping we could all go into town today, show Maya around the area. She should know the neighborhood since she'll be living here part-time. They spent the day touring the small Connecticut town near James's estate, looking at shops and restaurants, James playing tour guide, while Maya and Daniel maintained careful distance from each other. Maya watched James and Daniel interact, trying to understand their relationship. There was clear affection there, but also something formal, something that didn't quite read as father-son closeness. They were polite with each other, respectful, but there wasn't the easy warmth she'd expect from family. That evening, Maya was in the library, looking at fabric samples for reupholstering some of James's furniture, when Daniel found her. He closed the door behind him. "We need to talk properly," he said. "Your father could come in any moment," Maya protested. "He's on a conference call for the next hour. Please, Maya, just give me 5 minutes." Maya sighed and set down the fabric samples. "Fine, 5 minutes. Say whatever you need to say." "I never forgot you," Daniel said. "That night in Paris, it wasn't just sex for me. It was connection. It was meeting someone who understood something fundamental about me that I'd never been able to articulate. When I woke up the next morning, I wanted to stay, but I thought, that's not how these things work. You're supposed to leave. You're supposed to keep it anonymous and perfect. So I left, and I've regretted it every day since." "Daniel," Maya started. "Let me finish," Daniel interrupted. "I came back to Seoul after that trip. I finally started taking the business seriously, started being the person my father wanted me to be. And I told myself it was because I'd grown up, because I'd finally accepted responsibility. But really it was because I'd lost you. I didn't even know your name, but I'd lost you, and I needed to fill that emptiness with something. So I threw myself into work and tried to forget." "And did you forget?" Maya asked quietly. "No," Daniel admitted. "I dated other women. I tried. But none of them were you. None of them made me feel what I felt that night. And then I came here and found you engaged to my father, and I realized I'd never actually lost you, because I never really had you in the first place. That's not fair to your father," Maya said. "He loves you. He's proud of you. He talks about you constantly. You can't betray him like this." "Like what?" Daniel asked. "I'm not suggesting we have an affair. I'm suggesting you not marry him. There's a difference." "I said yes," Maya said. "I made a commitment. The wedding is in 6 days. Everything is planned. Everyone is invited. I can't just call it off because of feelings that might not even be real." "Do they feel real to you?" Daniel asked. "Because they feel real to me. Seeing you again, it's like no time has passed. I still feel that same pull, that same connection, don't you?" "It doesn't matter what I feel," Maya said. "What matters is what's right. And the right thing is marrying your father, who actually wants to build a life with me." "But do you want to build a life with him?" Daniel pressed. "Or are you just doing what seems safe and practical?" Before Maya could answer, the library door opened and James walked in. "There you are," he said to Maya. "I've been looking for you. The florist has some questions about—" "Am I interrupting something?" "No," Maya said quickly. "Daniel was just telling me about Seoul, about what it's like living there." "It's very different from here," James said, sitting down next to Maya. "More fast-paced, more intense. Daniel thrives there, but I'm not sure I could live that way anymore. I've gotten used to the peace of Connecticut." The next few days were a special kind of torture. Maya went through all the wedding preparations, finalizing details, having her final dress fitting, greeting James's business associates who were arriving early for the ceremony. And through all of it, she was painfully aware of Daniel watching her, of the tension that crackled between them whenever they were in the same room. 3 days before the wedding, Maya finally broke. She was in the garden, supposedly checking the setup for the ceremony, when Daniel appeared beside her. "I can't do this," Maya said before he could speak. "I can't marry your father knowing how I feel about you. It's not fair to him. It's not fair to any of us." "So call it off," Daniel said. "Tell him the truth." "And say what?" Maya asked. "That I slept with you 3 years ago? That I have feelings for you? That I'm choosing you over him? That would destroy him, Daniel. He loves me. He wants to build a life with me. I can't do that to him." So you're going to marry him anyway? Daniel asked. Even though you don't love him the way you should? Maybe I could learn to love him that way, Maya said desperately. Maybe these feelings for you will fade. Maybe they won't, Daniel said. You know they won't. This isn't going away, Maya. Maya felt tears start to fall. Then what do I do? How do I choose between doing the right thing and following my heart? How do I not hurt someone who doesn't deserve it? I don't know, Daniel admitted. But I know you can't marry him. Not like this. Not while you're crying in the garden 3 days before your wedding because you have feelings for someone else. That night, Maya made a decision. She asked James to meet her in his study. I need to tell you something, she said, her hands shaking, and you're not going to like it. She told him everything. About Paris, about the hotel bar 3 years ago, about meeting a stranger and spending one perfect night with him, about never knowing his name, about finding out that stranger was Daniel, about the guilt and confusion and feelings she couldn't ignore. James listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Did you know he was my son when you slept with him? James asked finally, his voice carefully controlled. No, Maya said. I didn't know anything about him. Not his name, not where he was from, nothing. It was completely anonymous. And if you had known? James asked. Would you have done it anyway? I don't know, Maya said honestly. Maybe. There was something between us that felt inevitable. James stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. I appreciate your honesty, he finally said. But I need to know something, and I need you to be completely truthful with me. Do you love me? Really love me? The way a wife should love a husband? Maya wanted to say yes, wanted to give him that. But she'd done enough lying, even if it was lying by omission. I care about you very much, she said quietly. I respect you. I admire you. I think we could have built a good life together. But no, I don't love you the way I should, not the way you deserve to be loved. And Daniel? James asked, still not looking at her. Do you love him? I don't know him well enough to say that, Maya admitted. But I feel something for him that I've never felt for anyone else. Something that scares me because it's so intense. And I can't marry you while feeling that way about someone else. It wouldn't be fair to you. James turned around, his expression unreadable. I need you to leave. Tonight, I need to think about this, and I can't do that with you here. James, I'm so sorry. Maya started. Please just go. James interrupted. Take your things and go back to New York. I'll contact you when I've decided what to do about the wedding. Maya packed her bags that night, crying as she threw her clothes into her suitcase. The wedding was in 3 days. Everything was ready, and she'd just blown it all up. She was loading her car when Daniel found her. He told me to leave, too, Daniel said. Said he needs space from both of us. Where are you going? Back to New York, Maya said. Back to my apartment and my life and trying to figure out what the hell I just did. Can I come with you? Daniel asked. What? Maya said, turning to look at him. Can I come with you to New York? Daniel repeated. We need to talk properly, without him here, without all this pressure. Let me drive with you. Let's figure this out. Daniel, I just destroyed your relationship with your father, Maya said. The last thing we should do is run off together. He's not actually my father, Daniel said. And Maya's world tilted again. What? He's not my biological father, Daniel said. I'm his nephew, his younger brother's son. My parents died when I was 15. James took me in, raised me, gave me a job in the company. I started calling him Dad because I needed a father, and he let me because he'd lost his son and needed someone to care about. We're family, but not the way you think. Maya felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. He introduced you as his son. He calls you his son. Why didn't you correct me? Because it felt true, Daniel said. He's been more of a father to me than my biological father ever was. And I thought if you knew I wasn't actually his son, just his nephew, it would make things even more complicated. More complicated how? Maya asked. Because if I'm just his nephew, then what happened between us in Paris isn't quite as terrible, Daniel said. It's still messy, but it's not like you slept with your fiancé's actual son. And I thought if you knew that, you might actually consider... Consider what? Maya asked. Being with me instead of him, Daniel said. Choosing me, not because he's my father, but because we have something real. Maya stared at him. You let me feel guilty for days thinking I'd slept with his actual son. You let me torture myself over it. I know, Daniel said, and I'm sorry. But Maya, he's not my father. He's my uncle, and you can't marry him when there's this between us. I'm not marrying him, Maya said. I just told him everything. I ruined everything. The wedding is off. I'm going back to New York alone, and I'm going to figure out my life without either of you in it. Please don't, Daniel said. Please let me come with you. Let us figure this out together. Maya looked at him, at this man who'd been a stranger in Paris and was now asking her to take a chance on something that felt impossible. Get in the car, she said. They drove back to New York in silence at first, both of them processing everything that had happened. About an hour into the drive, Daniel finally spoke. I should tell you the whole story, he said, about James and me, about why I was in Paris, about everything. Okay, Maya said, keeping her eyes on the road. My father was James's younger brother, Daniel began. They were in the hotel business together, started with one property that their father owned. But my father was reckless, made bad business decisions, nearly bankrupted them. James bought him out, gave him enough money to be comfortable, but removed him from the business. My father never forgave him. I grew up hearing about how James had betrayed us, stolen what should have been ours. Then my parents died in a car accident when I was 15. James took me in, put me through school, gave me a job in the company when I graduated. But I was angry. I blamed him for my father's failures somehow. I spent my 20s partying and avoiding responsibility, punishing James by being exactly what he didn't want me to be. And Paris? Maya asked. Paris was the end of that period, Daniel said. I'd been traveling for 2 years, spending money, avoiding James's calls, pretending I could just exist without consequences. That night I met you was supposed to be just another night in another city with another woman. But it wasn't. You were different. You actually talked to me like I mattered, like I was more than just some rich kid wasting his life. When I left the next morning, it was because I was ashamed of who I was. I didn't want you to know me, didn't want you to see the reality of my life. So you went back to Seoul, Maya said. I went back and I finally grew up, Daniel said. I started working seriously. I proved to James that I could be trusted with responsibility. I became the person he'd always hoped I would be. And I told myself it was because I'd matured, but really it was because losing you, even though I never really had you, made me realize I needed to become someone worthy of being loved. Someone who deserved what we'd had that night. That's a lot to put on one night with a stranger, Maya said quietly. Maybe, Daniel agreed. But it's true. You changed me, Maya. Made me want to be better. They reached Maya's apartment in New York around 3 in the morning. She lived in a small one-bedroom in Brooklyn, Nothing like James's estate, but it was hers, filled with fabric samples and design books and the evidence of a life she'd built herself. "You can sleep on the couch," Maya said. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what happens next." But neither of them could sleep. They sat up talking until dawn, really talking for the first time since Paris. About their lives, their choices, their regrets. About what they wanted and what they were afraid of. "I was going to marry him for the wrong reasons," Maya finally admitted as the sun came up. "For stability and security, and because it seemed like the smart choice. But I didn't love him, not really. And that's not fair to him." "He'll be hurt," Daniel said, "but he'll understand eventually. He was married before, to my aunt, who died in the same accident as my parents. He loved her completely. He knows what that kind of love feels like. He wouldn't want you to marry him if you don't feel that way." "Do you think he can forgive us?" Maya asked. "I don't know," Daniel said honestly. "Maybe, eventually. But it's going to take time." They spent the next week in Maya's apartment, ignoring calls from James's number, hiding from reality. They ordered takeout and watched movies and talked about everything. About Paris and what it had meant. About the 3 years in between. About what they wanted their future to look like. "I need to go back to Seoul," Daniel said on the 7th day. "I have responsibilities there, a job I can't just abandon. But I don't want to lose you again." "So what do we do?" Maya asked. "Long distance?" "For now," Daniel said. "Until we figure out something better. Until we know if this is real or just the fantasy of Paris extended." "It feels real to me," Maya admitted. "It feels real to me too," Daniel said. "But we should probably make sure before we blow up any more lives." Daniel went back to Seoul. They talked every day, video calls and messages and voice notes. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. 3 months later, James finally called Maya. "I've had time to think," he said, "and I've made some decisions." "James, I'm so sorry," Maya started. "Let me finish," James interrupted. "What you did hurt me. The deception, the feelings you had for Daniel while you were engaged to me. That hurt deeply. But I've also had time to realize that you were right to tell me the truth. You could have gone through with the wedding and I never would have known. You could have kept it a secret. But you were honest, even though it cost you everything." "I never meant to hurt you," Maya said. "I know," James said, "and I believe you. Maya, I'm 52 years old. I was married once to a woman I loved completely. My first wife, Daniel's aunt. When she died, I thought I'd never feel that way again. Over the years, I dated, but I never found that same intensity. When I met you, I thought maybe I could have companionship, partnership, someone to build a life with, even if it wasn't that all-consuming love I'd had before. But you deserve that kind of love. You're young. You shouldn't settle for what I was offering." "What you were offering was good," Maya said. "It just wasn't right for me. But someone else will be lucky to have you." "Maybe," James said. "But right now I need to focus on repairing my relationship with Daniel. He betrayed me too by not telling me about Paris. We're working through that." "Is he okay?" Maya asked. "He will be," James said. "We both will be. But Maya, I need you to answer something honestly. Do you love him? Really love him?" Maya thought about the past 3 months, the daily calls, the messages, the way her heart still jumped when she saw his name on her screen. "Yes," she said. "I do. I love him." "Then don't waste it," James said. "Don't let guilt or fear stop you from building something real with him. You two hurt me, but you also found something rare. Don't throw that away because of what it cost." "Thank you," Maya said, tears streaming down her face, "for understanding, for being kind." even when you didn't have to be. Life is too short for grudges, James said. I learned that when my wife died. Hold on to love when you find it, Maya. It's rarer than you think. 6 months after the canceled wedding, Maya moved to Seoul. She opened a satellite office of her design firm, taking on international clients, building a new life. Daniel met her at the airport, pulling her into his arms like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "Welcome home," he said. "Is it home?" Maya asked. "If you're here, it's home," Daniel said. They built a life together in Seoul over the next year. It wasn't always easy. Long distance had been hard. Cultural differences were challenging. Starting over in a new country was overwhelming. But they worked through it together. A year after Maya moved to Seoul, Daniel proposed. Not in Paris, but on the roof of one of the hotels he managed, overlooking the city lights. "I met you in Paris 3 years before I knew who you were," Daniel said. "And I've loved you since that first night, even though I didn't know your name, didn't know your story, didn't know anything except that you were someone I never wanted to forget. Will you marry me for real this time? Build a life with me? Choose this, even though it's complicated and messy and not what either of us planned?" "Yes," Maya said without hesitation. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Seoul. Maya wore a dress she designed herself. Daniel cried during his vows. And James was there, walking Maya down the aisle at her request. "Are you sure about this?" James asked as they prepared to walk down the aisle. "I'm sure," Maya said. "He's the one. He was always the one. I just didn't know it that night in Paris." "Take care of her," James told Daniel when he handed Maya over. "I will," Daniel promised. "And thank you. For understanding, for eventually forgiving us, for being here. Life is too short for grudges." James repeated what he'd told Maya on the phone. "You two were meant to be together. I was just in the way for a while. Now go build something beautiful." At the reception, Maya found herself thinking about that night in Paris 3 years ago. How one choice, one conversation with a stranger in a hotel bar had led to all of this. The complications and pain, but also the love and partnership they'd built. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, pulling her onto the dance floor. "Paris," Maya said. "That night. How impossible all of this seemed." "Was it worth it?" Daniel asked. "All the complications? All the pain we caused?" "Yes," Maya said without hesitation. "Every bit of it. Because we ended up here, together, happy. That's worth everything we went through to get here." 3 years after their wedding, Maya and Daniel were back in Paris for their anniversary. They stayed at the same hotel where they'd met 6 years earlier. They sat at the same bar where they'd talked for hours. "If you could go back," Daniel said, "would you do anything differently?" "No," Maya said. "Even knowing we'd hurt James, even knowing how complicated it would get." "Even then," Maya said, "because we ended up exactly where we needed to be. Together, building a life, happy in a way I didn't know was possible." "I love you," Daniel said. "I loved you that night in Paris when you were just a stranger. I loved you when you were engaged to James, and I thought I'd lost you. I love you now as my wife, and I'll love you for the rest of our lives." They toasted to that night 6 years ago, to chance meetings and impossible complications, to love that found a way despite everything, to the truth that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations. "I met your son in Paris," Maya had said to James that terrible day when everything came out. "That's impossible. He died 5 years ago," James had replied, revealing that Daniel wasn't his biological son, but his nephew. And it had been impossible, all of it. The fight, coincidence of meeting Daniel in Paris and then finding him again as her fiancé's son. The feelings that wouldn't be denied. The choice to tell the truth even when lies would have been easier. The slow rebuilding of trust and relationships. But impossible things happened every day. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, impossible things turned into exactly what you needed. Even if you didn't know you needed it until you found it in a hotel bar in Paris with a stranger whose name you never asked.